Energy Realities 93 Green Subsidies. After 92 episodes, the podcast is changing. Welcoming back our great Irina Slav.
Thank you. I don't deserve this, but anyway.
Yeah. Uh, uh, Changing the name to Energy Realities, that Stuart liked a lot. Me too. Bringing newspaper headlines and preparing the house to receive guests in the future podcasts. Good morning and good afternoon, Temi Nimet, Stuart Tully, and Irina Slav. And David
Morning.
Blackman. Dave
Hi,
Blackman is
everyone.
on vacation. He sent to us his ship to see.
I like that ship going into the sunset.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, let's start with newspaper headlines. Irina, please, you brought some headlines. Go ahead, please.
That's my favorite headline this year. I think it will be very difficult to top. Carbon emissions from research are the price we must pay to understand the world. This is an opinion piece in the Financial Times from a professor in. I'm sorry, I forgot her specialty was space physics, something to do with space physics. But the argument she puts forward in this piece is that some emissions are bad, most emissions are bad, but some emissions are good, they're necessary. Emissions from researchers who do work on climate change. And she was worried that some of her colleagues working in this field were concerned about their emissions and were planning to scale down their work in order to reduce their carbon footprint, which is unacceptable because we must generate, well, not we, but these researchers must generate these emissions to understand the world. I thought the science was settled on climate change, but they need to measure carbon emissions, they need to track them, and they need to find ways to reduce them, apparently new ways, as far as I can understand. So these emissions are okay. And what impressed me is, of course, the double standard, because it sounds exactly like John Kerry saying that, oh, was it Bill Gates? I think Bill Gates did say this, that it's okay that he flies around the world on a private jet because he's spending billions on funding climate change related research and other activities. I'm not a huge fan of double standards. So this was a really blatant example of these double standards. We should consume less of everything, including food, including fuel, including, basic comforts such as heating and hot water.
Or less
But
people.
researchers shouldn't worry about their carbon footprint because it's emissions well spent, as the author said. I'm done.
That was awesome.
You have another on German missions.
Yeah, kind of related. Germany has made great strides to reduce its emissions. It has reduced its natural gas imports. Last year was wonderful for the climate change enthusiasts in Germany. But it came at a price, and the price is a decline in industrial output, in industrial activity, which the media and official sources are attributing to higher interest rates and weaker demand for these products at home and abroad. It has absolutely nothing to do with energy costs, and I expect the higher electricity imports of Germany, which rose 62% last year, also have nothing to do with any of this, with the decline in emissions at the expense of industrial output. And it's not stagnant, by the way, it's falling.
Yeah.
Surprisingly. Germany is surprisingly going into recession. Nobody expected this. Yeah.
Good. You have another one, climate activist.
Why is it just my headlines? Yeah, good crop of headlines. This was just, yeah, apparently there's a group who calls themselves Star Extinguishers and who, yeah, vandalized an electric Tesla, which is redundant, but anyway, we'll forgive that. Um, yeah, they let out the air from the tires of a Tesla. Apparently, they didn't pay attention that it was a Tesla, or as Tammy suggested in our email exchange, the attack is on all cars. But what I found especially funny about this particular piece of news is that they're not wrong. It's not a gas guzzler, a Tesla, but it is an energy guzzler, and that energy comes from hydrocarbons, from mining and processing, energy demand, which is satisfied not by wind and solar, but by coal and gas. So they were right to, in a sense, to vandalize a Tesla. Much more right than vandalizing an internal combustion engine car.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
But, yeah, well, David's not here. Let's go directly to Stuart, please. Headlines.
You know, Armand, I just love our government. I am kidding. The U.S. has billions for wind and solar projects. Good luck plugging them in. We are printing money like you wouldn't believe around the world. And now that we came out with the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act, our energy costs, and that's in another headline that you have in another one, but we started out in 2022 with 8,000 projects trying to attach to the grid. We then, fast forward to now, we have 24,000 energy projects waiting to attach to the grid. And team, we had up in the Great Lakes area, 5 wind turbines, and they never installed any. They are giving back, of the $50 million, they're giving back 35 million. I went to OSU, so I'm going to have to do some math here on how many millions that they did go ahead and spend on permitting and zero power. So, let's go ahead and print money. But guess who's getting hurt? It's the disproportionately impacted communities. It's the taxpayers. I mean, this is... Anyway, sorry about that.
No, it's very pertinent.
Yeah.
All right. So we're back to my beloved government. The U.S. employment reports overstated 39,000 jobs in 2023. We got somebody that not only did not graduate from Oklahoma State, they actually created crayons. This government, they've been going out, and every time that they have an announcement, they increase the jobs numbers. And so in the Inflation Reduction Act, and according to the Treasury Department, they're bragging about how many green jobs they're creating. Well, if you can't connect them to the grid and you can't get them done, these numbers are overstated. And then the percentages of increasing is totally wrong. So the Fed is over here creating financial fiscal policies based on wrong numbers on the jobs that the government is saying they've created all these green jobs. So it's like, this is, that old game that we used to play where you have a pea under 3 different cups?
Right.
The shell game.
Yeah, there is no pea under these, and they're doing this. So anyway, it's just despicable.
Good. Another one you have. This is from the U.S. Department.
In this document from the U.S. Treasury, low income communities bonus credit program will do 1.8 gigawatts of capacity for the 2023 program. They tend to allocate 700 megawatts to facilitate low income communities. Here's the thing. None of it's happening on the 1.8 gigawatts. And I feel like I need to be Christopher Lloyd out of Back to the Future. 6.4 gigawatts. I mean, I need to grow my hair out because this is the only in the great Meredith Angwin has said that we've talked to, and Irina, I know you know her, I believe. And so she is so cool. And it's less than 30% of that nameplate gets to the grid. So they're over there saying we're going to fund 1.8 gigawatts, and it's like you're only going to get, let's say 35% of that, but you're going to pay for more because you got to have coal plants and natural gas plants to remain on standby. So she's right in her numbers. She came up with 180% increase of money that you need instead of a 20%. So, and this is from their own numbers. I mean, my crayon works pretty good from their numbers. And Tammy, you're great with numbers, by the way. These guys, I want to give the Energy Bad Boys a shout out. This one, these guys were great in this article. They are, look them up on Substack. They're not as funny as Irina. But the rates in the data sheets that they brought out is the cost for energy over the last several years is skyrocketing. The amount of money that we're putting into the grid, and then you have the FERC that Tammy's been talking about is announcing that we are going to have blackouts. So we have different government agencies, we have our politicians, and then we have people like the Energy Bad Boys coming out and saying, hey, wait a minute, let's have a little accounting session in order to go ahead and see about if this actually works. So hat tip to the Energy Bad Boys. Here's one of their charts that's in there. And when you look back in 19, I'm old and I can't see that early one. You really take a look at that. And so you take a look at where we are now in 2022. It's not matching up, and the money's just pouring out the door. And there's other graphs in there as well that I didn't send over. But the dollar per kilowatt per hour is like New York and California. I've said this before, and that is Governor Hochul put out 20% last year increase in energy, 20% this year in 2023, and 2024 looks like it's going to be 100% increase in energy for consumers. I got to check, when that's going to kick in. Could be 2024, could be 2025. But holy smokes, Batman, that's not good.
Yeah, well, they have to pay for all those offshore wind turbines,
Oh,
that won't be connected.
They did say they're going to hold another tender to which, previous hopefuls could reapply with new rates for their future electricity.
What's a few billion between friends?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's not like it's coming out of the governor's pocket.
Oh, absolutely. I'd like to put a fund together, a GoFundMe page to haul the dead whales off the beach and drop them off on the White House lawn. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, fun.
Sad, but yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. Tammy, I'm not sure you sent more than one, but this is the one I received.
No, I just sent one, and it links back to what everyone else has been saying. And I know this article's from back in November, but it's very important because part of what Irina showed about the drop in Germany's industrial production and their emissions and electricity consumption, this is a huge indicator. And that's their petrochemical industry is basically being decimated. And there's other predictions that say it'll be gone in about 10 years. And in this article that Javier Blas had, he referenced a BASF report to shareholders, where the BASF, which is one of the biggest chemical producers in Europe, in the world, had this great chart where it showed the drop in petrochemical production in both Europe and the United States. I think the United States was negative 1.6, Europe was negative 4 point something. And then if you looked at China and Asia, China is up 12.6%. And so they were bragging about how they were building this massive petrochemical plant in China in their investor thing, saying, okay, Europe is kind of the electricity prices are too much, the cost for all of these different things. There's all these new taxes coming on. We're just going to offshore to China. So China's industry is booming while Germany is deindustrializing and Europe is essentially deindustrializing. And then this goes to the taxation issues and the different things you were talking about, Stu, where they're increasing the prices and costs to ratepayers. Now, when Germany originally introduced its energy transition plan back in 2010 or 2011, they promised it would only cost the amount of a scoop of ice cream every month for people. So, a euro or 90 euro cents a month. That's all it would cost extra. Clearly, that's not true. So how come 13, 14 years later, we're not looking at those numbers and saying, you know what, this energy transition thing doesn't work. It costs more. Governments have to subsidize and subsidizing things, which I know we're going to get into right away. Subsidies are paid for by taxpayers. So the taxpayers not only have to pay more for the energy, they have to throw away money to these vested interests, whether it's wind, solar, battery companies, or whatever, in order to get that energy that isn't reliable anyway. So they get hit on it like 2 or 3 times over. And we should be learning from what's happening in Europe and Germany and not make those same mistakes. And I feel bad that every Western country is going down this same pathway where all it does is cost more for people.
Tammy, can I add something onto your point, your excellent point? And I'm sorry for complimenting you this morning. I know it's Monday morning, but China, Governor Newsom, the guy with the good hair, which I'm very jealous about, he is sending out, they're shutting down all the downstream and the and they're just killing China. So they can't keep their cities clean. But when President Xi comes in, they clean up the city, they get it done, and then they have meetings. And in those meetings, you pointed out the growth in China's downstream. And you also take a look, they're increasing at 1 million barrels a day that they're able to increase in their petro. So California, and I'm trying to get a story on this, is looking at importing all their gasoline and diesel and petrochemicals from China. They're killing the U.S. energy independence. And not only are you bringing up that we're losing industry to China, it's a horrible thing that our governor of California is handing over the highest gasoline prices in California, and the EVs are incapable of providing the change in the energy transition. Tammy, your points were outstanding.
But Stuart, and the project to back to the U.S. Chips and other items manufactured in China is working well.
The chips,
for instance.
Microchips.
Like microchips.
The bands.
Oh, the chip. Excuse me. I thought you were saying Jeeps, and so. The microchip problem is going to be accentuated. In fact, China had an article. There was an article out this morning on China and the chips. This came from the RT, or the Russian news source, which Irene and I have talked about, it's actually not bad. So, I mean,
I know it's not bad. I've commented on the air there.
it is. I mean, I'm like, it's pretty sad when you have to go to Russia to get the news. But when you sit back and it's funny. I mean, the chip is going to be accentuated by President Xi is already saying that he has acquired Taiwan, and our chip sanctions and the weaponization of the U.S. dollar against the world is pathetic. And we're weaponizing sanctions against China, and they're calling it unfair. So I think it may be a personal opinion that it may be another excuse to invade Taiwan.
Yeah, Tammy, because the U.S. is losing petrochemical industry, but is gaining manufacturing electronics. Is it true? Maybe.
That's an interesting point. I know that they're trying to subsidize, if we get onto the topic of subsidies, they're trying to subsidize the chip manufacturing in various jurisdictions. And I noticed that Brookfield Investments and Renewables is one of the partners in that, which is a Mark Carney endeavor. And now that he's part of Bloomberg, which is kind of interesting because Bloomberg is also funding the Beyond Petrochemicals campaign, which is to shut down the American petrochemical industry. Like, I mean, it's crazy. So, I mean, on the one hand, the United States is trying to generate its own microchips in order to reduce dependence on other jurisdictions, particularly Taiwan. But the thing is, okay, so let's say you home source your chip manufacturing, but you kill your petrochemical industry, which you require for every other bit of defense production, and you're going to make yourself dependent on your biggest potential enemy. It's absurd. It's beyond absurd. It's dangerous. And what the heck are they doing?
Yeah. I have only one headline. It's not headlines, a short video, not specific on energy, but it's very curious for me. Please.
These levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted, okay? You have to force behaviors. Force behaviors.
Stuart, I'm not sure that I got this point of the president of the world, but forced behaviors. What's the meaning of this expression?
Do you really want to ask me this on a live podcast? Hang on. I need to just take a deep breath and make sure that I don't get us thrown off the air.
Stu, remember, the internet is forever.
I know. That's why I'm actually my beloved partner, Michael Tanner. I'm trying to make sure that he doesn't fire me. So when we take a look at BlackRock. BlackRock is one of the most non-ethical organizations on the planet because of their dealings with the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization. Larry Fink is at the head of this, and I also want to say that I'm not suicidal. So if that's a joke that I don't know that will get censored, but by that comment, they have weaponized their investments, and they have tried to cancel. Irina has talked about this extensively on her Substack, and that is the lack of funding for carbon in the name, and they're trying to say ESG investing is good. So they try to force people to EVs, to renewables by their investments. And it's even more despicable when they force Africa to green energy and not let them use their great natural resources. So by him saying he's going to force people is an admission, just like Charles Schwab saying that they're going to take down the world. And they told everybody they're going to do a pandemic. They've then told everybody they're going to have a internet crisis and a grid crisis. I've got several stories on the grid crisis that is looking at cyber and physical tax on the U.S. grid. And they're also saying it as far as the world grid as well, too. So it's the world grid and the world internet that they're looking to attack. I just didn't create this on my own. It's all on YouTube.
Perfect. Temi, we talked about the history of subsidies a few weeks ago, and not specifically for green subsidies. Are there green subsidies and fossil fuel subsidies? How does it work?
That's a really good question. And I think it requires a lot of research and whatnot, just because there's different incentives out there, right? So you have the tax incentives, then you have the direct subsidies where they're getting loan guarantees or grants, like actual grants that they don't have to pay back or whatever. And I'm going to try and share my screen. We'll see if this will work. Okay, select window. I'm going to try. Okay, is that working?
You look good.
How about this? Can you see that?
Not yet.
You still
Not yet.
look good.
Okay, so yes, thank you. It's saying StreamYard has blocked it. So anyway, the Institute for Energy Research did a thing about federal energy subsidies for fiscal year 2022, and they published this back in August. And it showed that renewables received up almost 50% of all in subsidies and incentives. And the majority of the subsidies that renewables received, and that's wind and solar, are direct grants. So the petroleum industry and coal and nuclear combined received about 15%, and it was mostly incentives. So tax incentives are when a jurisdiction will encourage you to move there, or will offer different sort of tax write-offs and whatnot. A lot of the incentives for the oil and gas industry have to do with exploration and production. So if you're out there exploring or exploration and development, you can write off certain wells or whatever that were not productive or something, and various other elements along that sort of operational chain. And other tax incentives are ones that almost all businesses get to deduct from their taxes. So when you have a tax incentive, it's something that allows you to you're maybe not paying as much taxes as you might have been, but it's not money that is handed out from government at the front. A lot of the subsidies that go to the renewable industry, particularly wind and solar and battery manufacturing, are direct subsidies. And so the government is actually giving money, taxpayers' money, to companies to build or hire people or do any of these things. And a lot of that money, it doesn't have to be paid back. Or sometimes it'll say, well, maybe you should pay it back, but then they don't really, they go out of business or whatever. And so what I find interesting is that historically there's been a shift in the definition and meaning of a subsidy. So before, if you had different business tax arrangements or whatnot, that would be considered a tax issue. But now it's being counted as a subsidy. And that's so that you can put numbers together in order to demonize the oil and gas industry in comparison to the renewable industry, and trying to say, sort of like what Irina was talking about with respect to the emissions, some subsidies are better than others, right? So if you subsidize wind and solar, that's just okay, but definitely don't give any kind of tax incentive to the oil and gas industry. And one last point I wanted to make, there's countries like China that subsidize their own industries significantly in order to squeeze out potential international competition and also to provide an advantage in the export market. So I think there's lots of different ways that subsidies are implemented within the energy space, and a lot of it depends on whether it's state-run or private entities and so on. But in the end, taxpayers suffer.
Excellent.
Excellent. Irina, help us, please. Subsidies, incentives, non-return financing. It's a kind of donations, money for friends.
That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, we're going to support only the industries we like, and we're going to accuse the other industries of being bad and not deserving this support. Essentially, it does come down to donations, but these donations, I mean, donation sounds voluntary.
Yeah.
You know, these are not exactly voluntary because, as Tammy said, they are coming out of our pockets, all of our pockets, just because somebody in the government decided that these are the industries we're going to be supporting, whatever happens. You know, which is what the UK is doing with offshore wind, which is what the
Yeah.
US is doing. Well, the state of New York, at least, is doing with offshore wind. You know, wind developers said this was the most blatant example of the nature of these green subsidies to me. Offshore developers, wind developers said, this is getting too expensive for us. We closed our contracts, we closed our deals at much lower prices for our electricity when everything was different and raw materials were cheap and everything was cheap, borrowing was cheap. And now this has changed, which absolutely nobody could have anticipated, because obviously there's no such thing as inflation or interest rate hikes or raw material inflation, really. So we can no longer afford to develop these projects and break even and make a profit on them. And the government, instead of saying, well, sorry, make them cheaper, they say, sure, we'll just give you more money. Just apply again in our tenders, which is what the New York governor did. Let's, do another tender and we'll agree higher prices for your electricity. Well, I'm sorry, wasn't wind supposed to be one of the cheapest source of electricity in the world? And the media keeps repeating it, even though it's not. I mean, BP and Equinor gave up a project, an offshore wind project in New York, because despite the governor's plan to rehold the tenders, apparently they would still not make money from it. So they just quit it.
So what you're saying is that the energy reality is that wind and solar are not cheaper unless you keep handing out subsidies.
It's an amazing revelation, I know, but we all know it. They're not cheaper. And they clearly cannot stand on their own panels and turbine posts, because governments need to continuously pour more and more money into them, because they can't they can't turn in a profit without these subsidies.
Yeah. Stuart, affordability. You are a guy that are speaking this term a lot of times, and so green subsidies may affect the social equity or energy policies, moving money to benefit some groups of interests. Is money for friends?
Well, yes. It appears that when you take a look at the investors in I'm just trying to see what Tammy was doing here. Bear with me. This should bring up number 5, slide 5 from the World Trade Rules, and it even describes. It says it's sharing, but there is one line in here. Governments use green subsidies for one or more following purposes: enhance public goods, enhance quasi-public goods as knowledge-based capital, to redistribute income, to compensate for market failure, to compensate for government failure. I thought this is almost like an investor relations person writing this, or a novelist. I'm not sure which. Giving subsidies is generally considered part of the domestic policy space of governments. And in the U.S., there are people that have great heart for the disproportionately impacted communities but solar, I think there's more room for solar than there is wind. It is still, none of them are recyclable and sustainable. But even by the World Trade Organization, their definition is wealth redistribution into the rich. Did that answer that question?
Yes, yes, yes. But
Yeah, but
at the same time, the argument that people have is that you can create new jobs and you can reduce greenhouse emissions. What this approach means for you?
The only reason the U.S. reduced their carbon emissions, I think Tammy brought this one up on one episode, was the elimination of coal plants and increasing natural gas plants. And now they're trying to kill natural gas plants.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
If I could just link to what Stu was saying about helping out the redistribution of wealth and so on, a significant portion, probably 25 to 30% of the so-called subsidies in the United States with respect to energy have to do with the low-income assistance. So people on the lower end of the income scale who are having difficulty paying their electrical bills and their heating bills, they basically any of their energy, will get a subsidy from the federal government in order to help them make their payments, right? And quite often in developing nations, that's what you see when they talk about eliminating fossil fuel subsidies. They mean eliminating any kind of assistance to the people that keeps the price low. Because what the people pushing the energy transition often don't want to talk about is that they're very keen on making all energy more expensive. And I hate to say it, they lie. They lie about it. They keep repeating the lie that wind and solar is cheaper, and if we just build more, it'll be cheaper, but it isn't. As Irina pointed out, it's not just the cost of the facilities themselves and the redundancies that are required. It's the money that comes from the taxpayers in order to build them in the first place, which you shouldn't need to have to do. And so ultimately, it's all about making it more expensive for everybody and then providing a little bit of help.
And then providing help, yeah.
And providing help, right?
Yeah, because we're going to make your electricity 5 times as expensive, but we will help the poorest among you with a special fund that is going to be filled with money from the higher electricity prices. And
that you in the middle are prices.
Paying.
And who's getting richer? Why is it that we have Al Gore?
The unelected officials are getting richer, and their friends, of course.
Al Gore is one of the richest dudes around, and he's not worked a day in his life. So I'm kind of concerned. You know, I'd like to see his W-2s. Sorry, did I just say that? Did I say that?
His generation investment company goes around and provides funding for a lot of these initiatives, such as Octopus Energy. And, you know, he's there pushing governments to embrace this transition, then investing in companies that benefit from it. John Kerry did the same thing.
So
Al Gore does the same. I know. Mark Carney does the same thing. And then it's like, is that not a conflict of interest?
Doesn't that go back to
it's a good conflict of interest that, I'm sorry, Stu, that we can ignore in the same way that we can ignore the emissions from climate research. Yeah,
that's right.
This is different.
The legal document that I was reading from is from the European University Institute, the working papers.
European University Institute, what?
Institute for Working Papers by Robert Schmoon and Global Government Programs.
Sounds very
I'll forward it to you guys.
Let me go to another point. It's very critical for me in Brazil. Some people say that green subsidies involve local content. Local content means America first, Germany recovering industries. How do you see local content in this, let's say, environmental energies? Who
do you want on that one? America's not in U.S. first. Um,
Yeah.
it's just it goes back to this discussion, and I'm all for subsidies as Tammy described for the disproportionately impacted communities, but that goes back to the Al Gores and the Kerrys of the world, because they elevate the price of the energy and then it goes back. So America's not first.
Yeah, but they're trying. I mean, they're trying to build all new supply chains that will depend less on imported commodities and materials. Now, this will take decades if it's possible at all.
No,
But
it's going to China, Irina. I mean, the money that
I
we're
know,
doing.
Stu. I know, Stu. I know, you know, I know.
They say, I mean, I think they say it. They're saying that in order to try and prevent the people who support the America First thing from being angry, because you have to follow the
Yeah.
actions, right? You know, they say these things, oh, we're going to reshore and friendshore and all this kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly. But
And then you see the
it's
reality.
absurd. It's absurd. I mean, who would believe them? Yeah, there are many people who would believe them because they watch their news, their media, and they hear it repeated all the time. But yes, basically, it's what some developing countries are doing with their natural resources. Like Indonesia, years ago, they remember when they banned nickel ore exports.
Yeah.
In order to force the foreign companies mining that ore to build processing plants in Indonesia, which is absolutely a great idea. They shouldn't have had to force them, but apparently they had to.
Yeah.
And I'm sure other resource-rich countries will be doing the same thing, demanding local content. I don't know how local content would work with regard to cost. If Europe is any indication, it's not going to work well everywhere because Europeans are trying to develop their own supply chains in wind and solar, but it's just too expensive.
Expensive.
It's
Yes.
very
And I don't
expensive
see,
because of energy
yeah.
costs.
Yeah. And with all their new ESG rules that kick in this year, I really don't see how they can do it, which is why you see BASF and the other chemical producers and whatnot offshoring.
They went to China.
Went
Yeah.
to China. Yeah.
And now we have the farmers protesting because they can't get fertilizer.
No,
Well,
they're
and plus
protesting the removal of diesel subsidies.
Yes.
tax incentives, right? Because they
Tax
were, tax incentives.
I'm all in for supporting the farmers.
Yeah,
I'm
me
all
too.
in. I think if the oil and gas industry paid for farmers' diesel, I'm all in. I think that if we could do that, that would be a fabulous way in it. But you see, that would not be a redistribution of wealth. That would actually be helping the food supply as opposed to that, and take some of the profits from oil and gas and give it to the farmers that would help reduce costs. If we do the subsidies, it comes from the governments and they skim off stuff. This goes back to our earlier discussion of the U.S. jobs. 40, an estimated 40%, whatever the numbers are that they're creating, are government jobs. That's not good.
Yeah. Tammy, I suppose I got your link here. Can you see this? Yes.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, yeah. So that's the EU, European University Institute that Stu was talking about. And then I think Stu sent the publication there. He sent a link to it.
Okay. And there's another one that you show. This. No, sorry. This one. No, sorry. Let's see again. Screen.
Oh, that's from 2014, Stu.
Yeah,
It was still applicable.
Yeah, for sure.
There is 2 comments. Presentation regarding subsidies.
Hi, okay.
You know what? Great. Ahoy, Daz, and I apologize for butchering your name. Great question. Hydrogen, the hydrogen corridor that Irene and I laughed about the other day that they're putting it in, Hydrogen, from a technical aspect, Irina has written extensively on the amount of water that is needed, how difficult
Yeah.
it is to put in pipelines. I love the idea of hydrogen, but I believe that hydrogen may pull a Hindenburg on the consumer.
It will sooner or later.
Yes.
And the
another-
UK is
Same-
investing
the same
heavily in
comment.
it. Yeah.
Apparently, oh, I suppose the same. Yeah, but hydrogen is not an energy source. It's like a battery. You need to manufacture, fabricate hydrogen. It's a different approach.
A lot of
Yeah, and
energy
it's
to fabricate
volatile.
it.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Tammy.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You're right.
The second time in my life.
It's dangerous. Hydrogen is dangerous.
That's a good point. Yes, and
And well, in
expensive.
the UK, that's right.
makes
It's
it
expensive and it's volatile. And the UK wants to mix it in with the regular natural gas and put it through the pipelines to people's homes.
Yeah, but they gave up on 2 of these pilot projects
Yeah,
because people rebelled. Good for
yeah. And
them.
now they've released some new statements just before Christmas.
Can I throw this one out? Irina, you had a Substack article that was phenomenal. I did not know how much, sorry for complimenting you, but I did not know how much water it took in order to create hydrogen.
Yeah.
And the World Economic Forum announced that they're now going to have a worldwide water shortage because they're going to be controlling water. In Idaho, they just said that if you have a water source on your land, if you don't claim it within X number of time period, the state now controls it and will govern it. So it is now a water grab. They failed at COVID. They're going to go worse than COVID. And then they've even announced it. So if they told you the pandemic is coming and then they have told you they're going to do this, you kind of listen to what they're saying with their actions. And why is hydrogen gaining speed? It's the second order of magnitude of hydrogen is a water catastrophe. Irina brought that up. That's her point.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, very good. So the conclusions may be that green subsidies are what?
Obscene.
A wealth distribution.
They're a money grab.
I want to give back to the disproportionately impacted communities. I don't want this to be seen as I'm all in. And it goes back to Africa being taken advantage of. Africa is being taken advantage of by the Western again. And I applaud Africa for standing up. It's like Germany. Tammy brought up such fantastic points about the economic failure of Germany because of the low cost energy. It's all about the global effects, like George McMillan has been on my podcast, of power of energy is why people go to war.
Yeah.
It's also why we can't fight inflation until we get energy prices low. The Fed will not be able to control inflation. And I'm sorry, I'm such an energy fan, but I'm also an energy humanitarian that wants to eliminate energy poverty and poverty around the world. And none of these policies are doing it.
Absolutely. No, it makes it worse. And I think, when you say that you would like to help the ones who can't afford, energy shouldn't be that expensive in the first place. And that's the problem, right? Is that all of these subsidies and taxpayer redistribution or whatever, all it does is drive up cost, and that hurts everybody, especially the people near the bottom. So it shouldn't be that high, period.
It's not solution. Yeah. People, thank you so much. Irina, was a pleasure have you back to home.
Likewise.
And David, we are waiting for you from your vacation. So come back soon.
If that was his ship, I'm hanging out with the wrong guy. No wonder he doesn't invite me on his boat. Thank you
Excellent.
all very much.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank you.
great day.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great day. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.